All right, no bullshit intro, guys. That sort of stuff's for assholes. I mean, we're gonna do a tiny intro, where I just cover some basic things. We're gonna be talking today. It's Wombat Goes Deep, episode 8. Hey, good stuff. That counts as an intro. We're doing Kingdom Come Deliverance. A lot of people have been talking about the game. A lot of people have been saying, I don't know, probably fairly positive stuff about the game. I don't know. I don't really read reviews um, until after I'm done, for the most part. But yeah, thanks to Beat the Game on YouTube for the Creative Commons gameplay. That's what's going to be playing in the background. I'm gonna go ahead and throw in a bugs disclaimer before we get into talking about things. It's going to be graphics, gameplay, story, conclusions, same as the other 7 Wombat Goes Deep gameplay reviewed things. My bugs disclaimer goes like this: all graphical bugs can be semi-forgiven. I'm pretty easygoing on graphical bugs. Ruining cutscene immersion is a flaw worth mentioning and discussing, I think. But in general, in open world games, I'm very, very forgiving of bugs. That said, bugs that punish me or ruin my fun, I will make note of and actively have an issue with. And the version of the game that I played is 1.2. So that's it. That's the intro. We're going to talk about graphics, guys. If you don't want to hear about graphics, there should be a timestamp below that tells you where you can go to skip straight on to gameplay and story discussion. So, graphics. I'm probably not going to talk too much about the graphics for this game, but we'll lead into it with stuff that's largely just a repetition of what everybody else has said. The landscapes are genuinely lush and amazing. They look nice. The water looks pretty good, I'd say. I got to say, Sea of Thieves has really set a sort of new level for what water can look like inside of a video game. But it creates a really fantastic vision of 1400s Bohemia. Everything's realistic and great. The clothing, bathing techniques, everything is really well researched, well put into the game. Even though it looks good, there are fairly major cracks under a decently pretty face. Puddles and streams don't splash or ripple. When you go into larger bodies of water, they do. That's one of those like baseline dynamic things that I feel like should basically be applied everywhere. The character is regularly, obviously off the ground. Now, this is one of those things that you're just going to not pay a ton of attention to for the most part, but I noticed it fairly glaringly early on in the game when I was standing on top of a mud puddle on a hill trying to get it to splash, and I noticed that my shadow was something like 6 inches off the ground. Just bad collision meshing in that area, but it's oh, I ed too much and I had to cough. Sorry, guys. Anyway, there are massive light bleed issues all over. Artifacting in the lights is particularly distracting in cutscenes, but yeah, tons of geometry light bleed all over the place, flashing and strobing as well. The fade to black screws up fairly often, and there are regular flashes between the fade outs that show the game scene rather than dialogue cameras or cutscene. I mean, it's just a rough edge, right? There's plenty of information out there that basically they had delayed the game and they wanted to. Everybody was getting a little bit antsy to get the game put out, so there's some suggestions that the game might not have been baked all the way through. I'd say that's a fair assessment. I don't say it forgives anything. Again, I was playing 1.2. Apparently, the earlier patches were even rougher than that. But I don't know how long those stayed out. I think those got patched out fairly quickly. Characters pop out of existence when you stand in front of them instead of pathing around you. If you run into a character repeatedly, they will just blink out of existence. The first few times this happens, it's incredibly disconcerting because I can't think of another game where characters just go away. Like literally they just pop out of existence, disappear for a second, and then kind of reposition somewhere close to you and pop back in. It's weird. It's a compromise towards gameplay, and it helps stop door blocking problems that are, super famous from games like Skyrim and the Fallout series. Obviously, there are a lot of comparisons that can be drawn there. I'm going to try to avoid those for the most part because I want to compare it to some things that I feel like are a little bit more up that alley. Specifically, I'm going to talk a lot about Black Isle and Obsidian type games and other stuff like that. But that's gameplay talk for later. And story talk, especially. Character ages appear to be all over the place, I'd say, as well, sometimes matched with very inappropriate sounding voices. You'll have an old guy with it's standard sort of stuff. That said, as well, character variety is extremely low. I'll mention that here in graphics. I think I might have talked about it elsewhere, but character variety is extremely low. I've seen the same face on just tons of random villagers, and while that's understandable, it's one of those things that you just kind of go, okay, I'm at a tavern in a completely different part of the province, and I'm seeing a guy that looks exactly the same as somebody else I saw earlier, and that's fine the first time it happens, but like the fifth time you see the same guy, you kind of go, what? Hold on. Which is fine. One of the big problems I had with the graphics side of the game is that the desktop gamma is what they're setting when you change your brightness in game. So your entire desktop brightens or dims, even in windowed mode, and that stays that way until you either restart your computer or manually adjust your desktop gamma through the NVIDIA control panel or AMD control panel. I assume they have one on the AMD side. But it's just rough, man. Like, that's not how any of that's supposed to work. I don't know if that's a CryEngine limitation, because I haven't played a ton of CryEngine games. I played Star Citizen. I don't remember them cranking my desktop gamma. I haven't played that in a while, though, so maybe I just, conveniently failed to remember that. There were some audio issues that started up, which caused lines and sound effects to not be played at the correct time. They were playing on about a 1.5-second delay. Not a small, like small irksome delay that just threw off the dialogue, but like entire lip sync was playing, and then the character would start the lines up and then get about halfway through the line. And this was in cutscenes, like story cutscenes. A game restart fixed that both times that it happened, but I feel like that's worth making note of because it required a gameplay restart to fix. And everything went off on the sound effects side of things. The horse trotting, all that stuff. I'm throwing that under graphics just because it's sort of engine related. Bad camera angles and camera bugs plague everything. Again, not entirely uncommon. They're sort of quirky and hilarious in open world games. They're very common because what can you do, right? You've got your sort of fixed angle dialogue cameras like the ones on screen right now. And if you're standing a little too close to something, you're going to run into trouble trying to get that done. But obviously sometimes they just lose their targets or their target positions. And there you go. Other than that, I'll say on the positive side of things, one of the standouts for me was that armor degradation looked really great, and there was a lot of love that got put into it, and I can really appreciate that sort of thing. The dirtiness less so than the armor wear and tear from being in battles, like denting of armor and stuff like that. I think the wear and tear looked pretty good. I think the dirt kind of felt a little bit too plastered on and a little inorganic in a lot of situations, because it usually went from zero dirt to full dirt, and there was kind of no in between, no sort of fading through those, at least not that I noticed. You're in first person a lot, so admittedly you're riding a horse from one town to another, and then you take a look at your clothes and they're fucked up, and you're like, oh, okay, they got dirty. But I'd like to see them. There might have been stages, but obviously, like I said, first person perspective, not really a whole lot you can do about that. Animations for lots of actions take a bit long, and they're often disorienting. I'm gonna lock this under graphics for now, and if I bring it back up in gameplay, I'm sorry. But it's one of those things that it actually made me think a lot about how these things are handled in various games, because you look at something like Skyrim and you think, oh, you just look at a door and press a button and the door opens and you're nowhere near it. You don't see your hand go out or anything like that. And it ends up being one of the conceits to gameplay that it actually works that way. It's almost slightly better. It becomes disorienting. I don't look down at my own hand to open a door. I have proprioception, so I know my hand where the doorknob is because I looked at it to use the place cells in my brain to, sort of 3D map a target of where that doorknob's going to be. I use proprioception to reach my hand out to where I remember the place is that I just looked at. And I open the thing. I don't look down at it and do a whole, swoopy motion to open a door. It's happening right now on screen. Like, again, that's The first time you do that, you kind of go, oh, that's nice. I opened the door. The 200th time I open a door in the game, I'm just like, open the fucking door. I get it. You figured out how to get him to roughly grab a door handle by putting the door handle in the same place all across the entire game map. Great. Good work. Fantastic. Stop making me watch that fucking animation, okay? I'm fucking sick of it. And there's a lot of that. I'll talk a little bit more about that. In that case, the animation case in particular, in the gameplay section when I talk about combat a little bit. But yeah. So I'll say this to sort of sum up graphics. Like I said, I didn't want to spend too long on graphics. I know on my Witcher review, people were pretty upset that I talked about graphics for so long. And honestly, there's not a ton to say about the game. There's nothing remarkable in the game, and that's the last word I'm going to have on graphics. Basically, in the modern era, there is a minimum standard for graphical fidelity if you're making this kind of a game. If this is the look you're going for, there's a bottom end, right? These guys are above that bottom end, but they're still basically punching at AAA weight. And that's where you're going to hit the first complaints from people going, well, they're not a AAA company. They have 80 employees. It maybe doesn't make them a AAA company, but when you consider that, companies like Insomniac and groups like that who are firmly inside AAA territory don't have that many more employees. Like, you find studios that are considered AAA, they're maybe punching between 130 and 200 depending on crunch time and how many like sub studios they have and things like that. But individual studios run that size for AAA. 80 is a lot of people. The artists did a really solid job by modern standards. They did not do a standout job, and I think any other AAA team working on a game with the same goals in mind would turn out the same or better product. Would they turn out visually? Would they turn out a better game with, more give a shit locked in there to, make sure that they cared about the nooks and crannies of the world? Probably not. I wouldn't expect they would, because, this is obviously, if you're from the Czech Republic, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that this is a very attractive game for you to get right. Graphically, again, feel-wise, I think they did. Is it a standout game? No. It looks good, but it looks good because CryEngine makes things look good. You know what I mean? They did a great job on modeling time of day, I think, pretty well, once you get your brightness adjusted, which is going to screw up your desktop gamma. But, again, it looks fine. It looks fine. It's a good-looking game, aside from the fact that just about everybody in the game is fucking ugly and just unpleasant to look at 90% of the time. That's fine. That said, hey, I guess people were probably fairly ugly in 1400s Bohemia, especially poor people. I don't know. I don't know. I really don't. There aren't a lot of paintings of poor people. It's hard to tell. So, yeah, I mean, that's about all I have to say about graphics, man. That's not too bad. 13 and a half minutes. You guys can live through that. Gameplay. Let's talk about gameplay a little bit. The unarmed combat is bad. I do not enjoy the unarmed combat. Punching is fine, but it's arduous. It takes a long time to win a fight. You start off terrible, which, again, we're leading into that at a fantastic time. You're just terrible. You're ineffective at punching. You have no stamina, which is a core through a lot of the game, and we'll probably loop back around on that sort of base idea a little bit as we go along. But the unarmed combat, especially at the beginning of the game and through, I'd say, the first 10, 12 hours of the game, is just unfun. You get into a couple of fist fights, and that's how you level things, by doing them. Which is not necessarily a novel system in any form or fashion, but it's certainly a sort of a callback system to older PC games of the 90s, where that was kind of how you leveled stuff up, by doing it. You gained XP through performing the action. I think in a lot of ways those systems kind of fell out of favor because they can be a little bit arduous, and because you have to sort of balance towards making the person worse at the thing early on. Obviously you don't want a person to have a ton of bonuses early on, and balancing around that's complicated. In this game, they throw you into certain unwinnable and overly difficult scenarios early on, just to sort of take advantage of that, and they're fairly unrewarding, which is a term that's probably going to come up a lot over the course of this. But we're not going to labor on that too much right now. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about Save Your Schnapps and how this game's save system is an abomination before all things that are holy, and possibly one of the largest mistakes that the game makes, full stop. The save system works like this, because if you haven't played it, you deserve a rundown. The game autosaves at random points during missions. There seems to be no rhyme or reason as to when the autosaves kick in, except when it is least useful to you. You save after you sleep, and you save by drinking potions called Save Your Schnapps that you can craft. That being said, the manual save system with Save Your Schnapps has a maximum number of save spots, which is insane. It is hands down the worst save system I have seen in a game. I mean, maybe ever. Like, because the problem with it isn't, like, I've seen bad save systems that are basically no save system, or it only saves at the end of the thing. It's very punishing, but I had to pop my neck. It was all tense. But this one is just so, you know what I mean? It hates you, right? Your options are take a 5-minute ride to a bed. You know, okay, it's not 5 minutes, but like take a 20-second ride to a bed. This game really cuts away at you in like 10 to 30-second chunks. That's how it cuts away at your will to live. Ride to a bed and sleep. 30-second ride to the bed. 10-second run into the bed to go to sleep. Lay down in the bed, another 10 seconds. Watch the scene, move forward by an hour. That's another 10 to 12, 15 seconds. We'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. And then, hey, wake up, watch you do your sit-up animation. Another 15 seconds later, you've stood up. You've just wasted a minute and a half saving the game because the game doesn't want you to love life. And I'll say this, that's one of the huge, huge problems with the punishing bugs in the game, and with the punishing errors and just things like that. One of the reasons that Skyrim gets away with what it gets away with is because you can autosave anywhere. Anytime you press that save button, you're good. You know what I mean? And on top of that, you have about 150 other saves from every time you've walked through a fucking door. And that might seem like a lot, but that means that when you fuck something up, that you really fuck something up, and you're like, I want to run this back. Like, I'm not ready for this. I'd like to grind out this thing, or I'd like to retake that dialogue. Like if you feel like it's a very important dialogue thing to retake, you know what I mean? It's worth it to have that autosave system. And a lot of people will go, again, the first criticism will be, well, they wanted you to play through and live with the consequences of your mistakes. And that sounds great on paper, but it's actually just kind of unfun. You know what I mean? I'm not playing a game to be a fuck up. I can be a fuck up in real life. I can disappoint my mom in real life. I can do that. That's a thing. It's an option I have and often do, and I can't run it back because real life doesn't have fucking autosaves. I don't want to play Henry, the all thumbs dickhead who nobody likes him and he's shit at everything. Okay, that's not fun to me. And we're definitely going to talk about that more in the story mode, but we get the story portion of the fucking review. But again, the save system is absolute hot trash. I played through a quest stage. I went through literally 6 quest stages with no saves during any of them. And then I think I got surrounded by somebody or something happened and I wanted to run it back. And I didn't have a save. My nearest save was, 56 minutes prior. And that's not acceptable. You know what I mean? Like, I'd done 6 quest stages. I'm literally actively working my way through a quest. Save my fucking game for me. Because I don't have time to go make a potion Save Your Schnapps to do it. Oh, it's insane. But yeah, there's a mod to allow you to save without potions. That is a necessary install. Keeping in mind that you will still have a limited number of manual saves, which again is fucking bananas. That doesn't make any fucking sense. You cannot justify that decision to me in a way that will make me feel like that was a good idea. Nobody can go, no, we're to live with consequences. Go fuck yourself. That's not an answer. You can live with your consequences. Like, again, if you want to talk about player choice, which this game seems to waffle back and forth on, we can talk about player choice. There's no choice involved in this. Making me live with the consequences of my choice is like, well, that's, again, if somebody wants to do that, they can just not save. They can just not load their saves. They can make that conscious decision that they're going to live with whatever they do in the game, full stop. If you're going to make me live with the consequences of my choices, make it a linear game and just tell a linear story at that point. Otherwise, don't give me the option and then run it back on me. There's a lot of talks about this. I want to say Josh Sawyer has done a couple of talks about this. He's a former Black Isle, current Obsidian employee, about punishing player choice. I think it's a GDC talk called The Right Choice or Wrong Choice or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I'm pretty sure it was Josh Sawyer that was giving the talk. Very good talk. I recommend watching. It's on YouTube. But yeah, the save system is broken. It's broken. It's just completely indefensible, and it needs to be just stripped out. The autosave spots need to be overhauled so that you autosave in sensical times. Like anytime I complete a quest objective, just save the game for me. Stop being stingy with the fucking autosaves. It's ridiculous. And again, that achieves the same thing. That achieves consequence for choices I make, ridiculous. Fix the save system. It's stupid. It was wrong. Like, I'm sorry you guys tried something. It's wrong. Warhorse, I love you. Daniel Vavra, I love you. Mafia 2, one of my favorite games. I'm going to say that a bunch of times so that people can't criticize me. I love Mafia 2. It's amazing. Moving on from the same save system for now. I might come back to it. No auto run. There is no auto run in this game. There should be an auto run in this game. You have to go over open fields forever. Even riding the horse is arduous. Fast traveling is fine, but the lack of an auto run contributes to a couple other things. Vis-a-vis. I said a real French. Vis-a-vis exploring the world map that are just end up being unforgivable, right? There needs to be an auto run in this game. There's not one. There should be. Put in an auto run. I don't know why it's not there. The world map is too large. And you move too slowly, even with a horse at full gallop, for there to not be an auto run in this game. Just put in an auto run. Just don't argue with me about it. Just put in an auto run, Warhorse. You can't trample people with your horse. This, it's one of what you're going to hear across this review as being a myriad of disappointments. One of the first things I did, the absolute second I got onto a horse, was ride directly at a human being at full speed, only to bounce off of them. As though I were trying to scrape the edge of a toy truck around a rock in my backyard. It was disappointing. I expected to hit the person, to have them scream. A rag doll would fly gloriously out from under the hooves of my horse, preferably bloodied. Nothing. You cannot trample people, even if you try. I thought, even after I did it the first time, I thought, holy shit, it's okay. That was a fluke. I wasn't going fast enough. Maybe I just glanced off of him. Maybe the collision didn't register properly. I thought anything. Of course, these people made an open world game. They've played other open world games. Of course you can trample people with horses. It's the 1400s. That's probably a leading cause of death. But no, you cannot trample people with the horse. Minus 10 points. Okay, 0 out of 10 for the entire game because you can't trample people with a horse. Done. The reading bit I thought was fairly clever. That is to say, your reading skill. When you take on the reading skill, books have characters out of order, making it somewhat difficult to read. Obviously, your brain can put those together fairly well. It was fun. It ended up being, like many things in this game, fairly shallow. I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't roll out longer. And basically what you do, the reading in this game, by the way, I don't think I said it earlier, this will be rife with spoilers. These are spoilerful. I don't talk an hour and a half with no spoilers, guys. It's just not how it works. Like many things in the game, the reading bit was shallow. You go to Ujits, you talk to a scribe there. He has you do a couple little things, just a couple little quest pieces, and then you can read, and that's basically it. Then you get a couple more books over the course of time. You can buy books, and your reading skill will improve from there. The usefulness of your reading skill is fairly minimal, other than that it's kind of fun and you get skill books. I feel like it ended up feeling like sort of a tacked on thing that is played up in some quest dialogue sequences every now and again, but nothing really crazy amazing there, worth writing home about, I'd say. So again, reading bit was clever, a little bit shallow. There are a lot of systems like that in the game, where there's a little bit of depth there, and if you're really thirsty for that sort of a gameplay experience, you're not gonna get your whistle wet. You know what I mean? Like the reading bit, I was ready to come back and do reading exercises with the guy. Maybe we're gonna do flashcards. You know what I mean? Did they have flashcards in the 1400s? They probably did, but we didn't. We didn't come back. We didn't do flashcards. He didn't get me a copy of Hooked on Phonics. None of that happened, and I was a little bit let down. So. Little sad that the reading was so shallow, but I mean that's going to tie into some other gameplay shallowness that we get into later. The armed combat is solid once you get used to it. Again, one of the problems here is that Henry starts out as some sort of he's got a muscular dystrophy and some kind of brain disorder where he just can't move his arms normally. This guy's supposed to be the son of a blacksmith, but he sucks at everything. Like his dad did a terrible job preparing him for life. I don't know exactly how old Henry's supposed to be, but I mean, he's awful at everything from the beginning. So you got to push through that. And that extends out to all armed combat. Swords feel like shit. Bows feel like shit. You really got to put like a solid hour, maybe 2 hours just walking around looking for people to beat to death before you're going to get your stuff up to, I'd say, around 4 or 5 is when your weapons start to feel a little bit better. You're going to be usable around 3, 4 or 5. They're going to start to feel a little bit better. I think all of them cap out at 20. But yeah, it shares similarities with For Honor. I know that's probably a comparison that's been made like a dozen times. It's an apt comparison. Nobody can really argue that it's not. It's got this 5-point striking system. When you're building something off of reality, there you go. I think the problem is For Honor did it much better. For Honor gets this sort of fighting game feel about it, where Kingdom Come Deliverance sort of ends up feeling like, let's guess where he might not block my thing at this time. A lot of the stuff they teach you ends up not necessarily working in fights later on the fly. Like when the guy is teaching you how to do the thing and he's not attacking you, that's great. When you get out into the field to try to do those things, especially unless you go out and grind combat skills up, which I did not do. I did a natural playthrough of as many things as I could stand to do before I decided to finish up the main story quest. Again, I played through a lot of the game and did as many side quests as I could. A lot of them ended up kind of weirding out and not completing. Not a lot of them, but like 5 or 6. It's rough. Unless you're desperately interested in having big drawn out battles, the fighting system becomes a chore that you'll kind of find yourself avoiding. If you're like me and what you're there for is more the conversation. I love a good fight. I enjoyed For Honor. I haven't played it in forever because I didn't enjoy it enough to play a dead game. Ooh, get fucked, For Honor fans. I'm just kidding. For Honor's a great game, like I said, but it's you know what I mean. It did the combat better. For Honor it's not a chore in that. There's this sort of feeling like I can do this based on my skill. In Kingdom Come Deliverance, when I felt like I was trying desperately to use my skill in combat, when I thought, man, I'm really putting my thought into this. You know what I mean? I ended up having giant long draws or fights that I eventually started losing and then just ran away from, especially early on. Again, this is low skill level fighting. Perhaps on the up end, things change a little bit. But again, I switched to maces after having played the game for, I don't know, 10, 12 hours. And I only got my maces up to, I think, 9 by the end of the game. So that's with the casual fighting that came along with trying to talk my way more out of situations than fight with anybody. So just to keep talking about the combat system a little bit, because that is a large part of what you're going to be doing inside of the gameplay, outside of just standard sort of conversation systems, which don't have a ton to offer, and we'll get into those in a little bit anyway. The fights generally go one of two ways. You either get a flurry of quick hits and kill them outright. You catch the guy on the side of the head, he's staggered. You just keep windmilling. I decided to windmill in my chair for some reason. And then you just beat the living shit out of him. 3 smacks right to the dome. He's gone. He's taking a nap. You know what I mean? Or it's a long, drawn-out fight. And if you end up in a long, drawn-out fight, you better hope that the guy is of a similar skill level to you, or that your strength is high enough that if he clinches on you, there's a lot of grappling that you can push him away. If you lose those fights, you're going to be a sad, sad boy. The clinches, because it's going to knock you off balance, it's going to take some of your stamina, and then you're going to likely take a follow-up hit. Whereas they seem to recover a little bit better, especially at those lower skill levels. You don't attack very quickly at all, which is what ends you up in those fights where you flail and kill them outright, or you end up in a long, drawn-out fight, like I said. Anybody with a shield will be an exercise in patience to get through unless you catch those early hits. I did a number of things to try to get through shield fights a little bit better. Again, a lot of this is talking about low levels with weapons. This might clear up later on, especially as your strength starts to climb. I think my strength at the end of the game was 16, so I almost got there. It might not have quite gotten there, actually. It might have been 15. But you know what I mean? Like, if you can try switching to the side, attacking from the side the shield's not on. They tend to just cover that side, and the more you wear yourself out, the more you're opening yourself up for, counterattacks. It just ends up being kind of displeasing in general to fight anybody with a shield. It was real rough. It was real rough. One of the gameplay things, I'm going to put this under gameplay rather than story, because I'm going to consider this a gameplay fault as we move on slightly from the fighting system. We're going to come back to it in just a second, though, but I made a note of it because it was around this time that some frustrating things started happening. You're often sent on official business for nobles in the game, only to find guards you can't explain anything to and lock doors. So you're literally sent out to do gameplay things that you probably, unless you want to play as a dishonest person, shouldn't be leveling. And they sort of try in the intro to have you go in this direction, to have you go in hey, get some lockpicks from this guy to maybe do a thing, but that's not the only way to solve the problem. So maybe you don't need the lockpicks, but you'll go find locked doors or you'll find guards, and your option at that point is to either become a criminal by knocking out this guard and stealing his keys, or lockpicking a door and hoping you don't get caught. But maybe you're playing Henry as a pious guy who doesn't want to lockpick. Then you're disappointing a noble who's told you, go get me wine or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, at that point, if I'm a blacksmith's son in the 1400s in Bohemia, I'm going to go get him wine. And you know what I'm going to do in realistic 1400s Bohemia? I'm going to say, hey, I've just been sent here. Lord Capon's at the bathhouse. He desires wine. Open this door for me. And then they will, or they'll get put in the stockade, right? You can't explain that to most of the guards, and the guards do not believe you if you try to tell them, unless you're dressed appropriately, obviously, which is part of the dialogue system, which has a couple different components to it. You're just really good at speaking, or you can be dressed nobly or in a way that endears you to the person, or you can threaten them. And those numbers don't exactly mean what they say, which, again, I'm going to cover that a bit under the story section. There is a singular gameplay moment that I'm going to jump to now as we sort of work the way forward through my notes about gameplay. The difficulty spike of the runt fight is broken. It's absolutely broken. The runt fight is the first sort of large boss, like main story boss that you run into. That's the only way I can think to describe him. Let me set the scene for you. So Runt is this big dude who steals your dad's sword. And then you finally track him down to this place called Pribyslavitz as you're working with the nobles in the area to try to figure out what's been going on with this whole human attack on your hometown. You go in to fight the guy because you're all full of piss and vinegar. But what you got to do is you got to fight your way through Pribyslavitz, which is full of mercenaries and humans who are there to kill you and fuck the corpse. Now, you don't want your corpse fucked, so obviously you fight with all the other guys or you'll lose. So you help those guys fight their way through the courtyard. You get your way in, you find Runt, and the game auto saves right before your fight with Runt. So it does not refill your health for the fight, which wouldn't really matter anyway. And the guy is insane. I get that maybe their suggestion here is that it's realistic. He's like, 6'5" and fucking a trained swordsman who's both spry and strong. Super. I'm trying to play a fucking game, Warhorse. What do you want me to do? Go out and grind all my shit up to 20 so I can kill Runt a little bit easier? Nobody's going to do that. No human being's going to do that. And then you're going to have an autosave in a punishing system that's either going to say, okay, take this autosave or jump back 3 hours and go grind and then come back and do this fight again later, right? Obviously, if you save your schnapps there, good. You'll maybe have a different option. But there aren't that many options, you know what I mean? Especially since underneath some games, there's some of the quests, there's a timer system. Again, that's the thing I'll probably talk about a little bit more later. But the Runt fight is broken. So what ended up happening, it saves your current health and injury state right before the fight, after fighting through an entire battle to get to the place where he is. So that means if you want to get in better shape, you have to both have a save right before the battle, which, again, if you're smart, you would have done if you have a save your schnapps. So that's not too bad, but you have to replay the entire game. But there are archers on elevated positions, which are fantastically hard to kill because the swinging in combat is sort of like physics driven or something. The animation's a little bit weird that way, and if you don't make contact, you don't make contact. It's not very forgiving. So if you want to be in better shape for that fight, you have to redo the entire battle until you get to the fight to fight against him. And then when you get into the fight, it is ridiculous. Look up some YouTube videos of how people kill Runt. What people do is they get a bow and arrow and they kite him around the farmhouse farmhouse attic that you're in, trying desperately to stay away from him, or whatever it is. It's a castle attic, whatever you end up in. And they just kite him around, firing arrows at him. That's broken. That's just bad. Like, that game is bad game design. It needs to be fixed. That boss fight doesn't make you feel like I'm headed for a life. It doesn't make me feel like I earned anything. It makes me feel like, you know what I did? I downloaded fucking cheats. I downloaded a trainer and I turned on infinite health and infinite stamina, and I still had to cheese the fucking guy to death. And then I turned the trainer off because I didn't want to use the trainer. I wanted to earn my money and I wanted to get into fights and win fights. I wanted to be, a late Middle Ages hero or whatever. You know what I mean? Or is it early Middle Ages? Shit, I don't remember my numbers. But anyway, it's broken. The Runt fight's broken. It needs to be fixed. It's bad. It's bad, and honestly, it's probably demoralizing to everybody. So when you get to the Runt fight, there's no shame in that. Just cheat. It's fucking broken. I'll say this. In some quests, as we move on from Runt, there's a clever way of handling verbal instructions for where to go. They'll say sort of, hey, you're going to go down here to the bridge. You're going to take a left. You're going to go until you see the big maple tree with a fork in it, and then you're going to turn to the left there. And one of the things that's nice about that is you don't have to remember all that in most quests that they have in the game. Sometimes it gets a little bit wonky. But you don't have to remember that in most quests. In most quests, you get to the bridge and then it says, now go find the maple tree with a fork in it. And it's like, okay, this is fun. I'm looking for visual clues and markers in the world, but they've done it in I think, a more clever way than, say, Morrowind. So it was I found those to be really positive and kind of fun and exploratory in a way that's guided, so it's not unfun if you get lost, right? It can be a little bit weird. You can end up kind of walking around looking for stuff, and you're like, well, I don't really know if I went the right way or not, because it just says look for this thing, and you're in the middle of an open sort of wooded area, and you're like, I don't really know which way to look for that thing in. So I enjoyed those, but on the flip side of those, there is a completely unclever way of handling just vague quest directions. So they have a couple times in the game, I think 3 or 4 times in the game, they sort of just say, you say, where is he? Be like, oh, I guess he went to the north, and then he's probably in the woods. So you look at your map, and you have a gigantic yellow area outlining the entire woods north of you. And there is no trick to that. You just have to ride through the woods looking for the guy. It is unfun, it's uninteresting, and the woods do not have enough going on. Like, if you can believe this, the woods do not have enough going on to make it worth 20 minutes of my time riding around hoping that I happen across the right area. Now, sometimes I'd come across the right area 3-4 minutes. That's fine, not a real big problem. But, there were a couple of times, especially when it was starting to get dusk, the sun was starting to go down, things were starting to get a little dark, where you just kind of like, you're basically moving, opening your map every, 50 feet and kind of making sure you're going to an area you haven't explored already. And there's nothing fun about that. That's not enjoyable. Like, again, just to run it back from sort of video game to real life, if somebody said, hey, he's in the woods, you just say, well, fuck it. We'll wait till he shows up in a city or something. You know what I mean? Going and combing through the woods alone is madness. That you can't find people that way when they're injured and you're trying to save their lives, let alone when they have some minor piece of information that you need about who paid them off or why they've run away. In one case, you go find this guy, and you've got to ride down an entire river. And of course, the last charcoal burners at the far end of the river are the ones that you're supposed to talk to. Annoying. You get there, then they refuse to tell you unless you do something for them. So you go do something for them. You come back. It just feels arduous. You talk to them, and they finally tell you where the guy is. You go talk to the guy, and it turns out he's not even like the guy you wanted. He's just a guy, and he's like, I recognize one of them, so I thought they might kill me. And you're just like, this was like 45 minutes of my time for a guy that's not even involved. He just recognized the dude. And I get like on an investigatory way, that's kind of like, I guess maybe that's interesting. But if you told me I was playing like weak, lame, giant, slopey, four-headed 1400s Bohemian Batman, I'd be like, cool, but at least give me a utility belt. You know what I mean? I'd be like, that's fine. I'll do the investigation part, but give me a fucking utility belt at least. You don't really ever get one. Again, there are no real clever ways to track people down when you get this stuff. There's no helpers. You just ride through the woods. And it's realistic, sure, not enjoyable. It went from being this thing that's sort of a minor quibble to there are moments in the game where you're riding around in the woods and it strikes you that the only reason you're in these woods and the only reason you would ever be in these woods is to look for this one asshole. And you don't actually care. You don't actually care that much. You're not super invested in it, especially in finding this one asshole. But there's no other way to continue on with the story, so you're going to go find that asshole, and there you go. Yeah, that might be dipping into story a little too much, but fine. We'll keep moving on with gameplay. You always move slightly faster than the people you're walking or riding with. Always. Now, this is one of those things that, again, I thought we'd solved this. I even remember I was vaguely excited because I seem to remember somebody mentioned that this was fixed in like Kingdom Come Deliverance. This was a thing you could do, and maybe they've fixed it since. But I ride faster than everybody. Even on my level 2 horse that I bought early on in the game, I ride faster than everybody. It's just infuriating. And the worst part is the sound is set up in such a way, right, that you need to be in a fairly exact radius to hear anything well. If you're 20 feet away from people on your horse, they sound like they're, on the other side of a field, just talking. They're just, it's not. It's frustrating because it means you're basically constantly hitting the shift button, which is the horse auto run button, and then letting it go so that you don't pass them, so that you roughly keep yourself right in the speech zone so you can hear what's going on. A specific example of this that was very hilarious and kind of frustrating to me was the first time you go on the hunt with Lord Capon. I think it was that one. It might have been the one slightly before or after that. Either way, you're riding with Lord Capon. And after he gets done saying all of his quest pieces to you, you're in a quest where you're specifically supposed to be riding with him, and this is a regular throughout the game that you'll see constantly. He kept being surprised to see me. He was like, "Oh, good to see you, Henry." And it's like, okay, that cooldown is like 5 seconds on greeting. So literally every 5, 10, 15 seconds he's saying, "Oh, what are you doing here? Good to see you, Henry." That just constantly, the whole ride out to the fucking woods. And it's like, come on, man. That's simple stuff. Like, you got to just be like, look, he's riding on a thing. You're on a mission with him. It's okay, In a later version of this, actually, no, it was the one where we were going to the woods to fight people and Lord Capon came along. So this was a little bit later in the game when this one happened. It wasn't the original hunt. Because right after this, we went and stormed the guy's Wolflin. It was the Wolflin of Craml, whatever fight. I can't remember the name of it. The Wolflin fight, where you go into the woods with Captain Bernard, I think, and Hans. And so once they finished doing their talking, everybody just kept greeting me over and over. "God save you, Henry!" Just constantly, the entire ride. It was stupid. It was broken. Very, again, funny for like 15 seconds, but it was like a 4.5-minute ride from, where I'm just hearing myself be greeted. So again, comical, but just like fix it. That's bad. So we go and fight Wolflin, and we finished fighting with the group, right? All those guys came from Ratai, I don't know. People say it like 6 different ways in the game. We finished fighting with the group I was on a mission with. I'm aiming my bow at a corpse because I literally just killed the guy, so I was going to shoot one more arrow into him because you get that mercy kill thing sometimes. So I wanted him to be dead so I could loot his body. While I was aiming a bow at a corpse, one of the guards, one of the guys from the city, walked past me and tried to place me under arrest for aiming a bow. So literally guys I just fought with did not turn off their town guard AI immediately after a fight with enemies that they know they're there with me. It's beyond immersion breaking, because not only was it immersion breaking, it punished me. I happened to have the 200 gold he wanted on me. But my options, had I not had 200 gold, and this is fairly early mid-game, so depending on how you've been spending your money, you're not necessarily going to have 200 gold sitting around that you can just throw at this guy. Especially if you're repairing regularly. If you've got some nice armor that you're trying to keep in decent shape, you might not have 200 groschen on you. So I'm put in this situation where I either have to kill this guy, I have to pay him 200 groschen, or I have to talk my way out of it. Of course, I try to talk my way out of it. nothing doing, because obviously there isn't an option for, we literally just fucking fought together. These are the guys that were trying to kill us. I was just making sure he's dead. That's not an option, because obviously the AI has just gone full retard and there's nothing you can do to save yourself. And so I had to give him 200 groschen. And if you didn't have that, you have to go to jail. If you couldn't talk him out of that, he will arrest you. You will be taken to Ratai jail, and you will be forced to sit there for 5 days, which may or may not fail follow-up quest stages, because some of them have invisible timers. I don't know. I think that was a main story quest, but it's a possibility. Either way, you're punished because the AI broke, and you're punished irreparably because the AI broke, and it didn't autosave before the quest started, I'm pretty sure. So, I would have to redo a conversation in Ratai, do the 4-minute ride again, and then hope that I don't accidentally point my arrow 2 seconds after the thing's over. It's broken. It's broken in a way that punishes me, and that's what I'm saying. Bugs are fine. That's not fine. Having to pay 200 groschen. Hope I get lucky with a roll on a dialogue check, or go to jail for 5 in-game days, which is slow, by the way. Unacceptable. They're unacceptable options. And it needs to be fixed. Like, honestly, it's I don't say whatever you want. The fact that shipped is a thing that happens, like, you guys can go, oh, they put the game out early and the patches are going to get it into shape, and that's fine. A year and a half from now, I'm sure it's going to be a great game. But you know what? You could probably say the same thing about Fallout 4. A year and a half later, if I install enough mods, Fallout 4 is a decent time. There's even a mod that pulls out the core storyline for the most part. Great. Not my kid. Fantastic. Love it. But just Jesus. Anyway, moving on. I gotta, you know what I mean? I gotta get through this stuff. It's gonna be like a 2 fucking hour review, isn't it? Let's see. About 6 times in the latter part of the game, I was randomly stopped by guards in cities after coming out of conversations. I don't know what for, but in the latter half of the game, I'm gonna assume that I triggered something somewhere, and just somehow it got back to me at some point, even though it wasn't marked on the map that I'd done anything wrong. And guards just came up, and I came out of a conversation. I'd turn around. There'd be a guard standing there. He'd say, "You're going to have to pay for those crimes." Very non-specifically. A lot of times they'll list what you did. These times I'm talking about specifically, again, in the latter part of the game, they did not tell me what I did. They did not list any specific crimes that I was responsible for. And then they just insisted that I give them varying amounts of gold between 15 and 180, or groschen, I'm sorry. I don't know if that just means gold or what. I don't know. Check. It tries to have deeper systems, and I can sort of respect that. But the result basically either feels the same as comparable games, especially in the case of dialogue and overall notoriety systems. They don't really do anything that New Vegas didn't do. Everything sort of still feels like big blunt weapons. There are no real personal relationships taken into account. So if a town doesn't like you, the town doesn't like you. Full stop. And so like I said, it doesn't really end up feeling better than comparable games from whenever New Vegas came out, I think a decade ago. It doesn't really feel any better than that. And honestly, it just feels outright broken when things randomly seem to go wrong because the underlying systems end up getting, confused or doing things that you did something that you didn't realize, and you end up getting punished for it later, like in the case of the things I just discussed, with pointing the arrow and random stoppages by guards. I'd say on the gameplay side, one of my biggest pet peeves that built up over the course of things was that there is tons of time wasted fast traveling and the wait system. The wait system is very slow and pretty rigid. The same thing for fast traveling. You're basically going to see the same couple of fast travel events come up where you run into a series of, I'd say 4 or 5 wayfarers, maybe 6 or 7 on the up end. Sometimes it'll be a guy that just insists that you must be a poacher because you were riding in the woods, and that's why you must be a poacher. it wastes just a ton of time. It really, really does. In very upsetting ways. The fast travel system is fine at first. It ends up feeling kind of slow towards the latter part of the game where you're just trying to get places and get things done. Because the novelty of watching your guy move around the map is long since worn off. The wait system is slow, unnecessarily so. I understand that they're doing code things behind the scenes to try to change the time of day and get the AI set up so that it's running at the right time of day. It's too slow. Honestly, it gets a little bit frustrating when you have to wait a lot, even in games like Skyrim or Fallout 4, which have wait systems. Same thing I'd say in The Witcher 3. If you have to wait too often, it gets frustrating. And one of the problems with this game is you cannot wake people up to force a conversation with them unless the game decides, I think, that it's an important enough thing to do. Like if it's an important enough quest, I think sometimes they'll wake up and talk to you, or rather it will just cut you into the dialogue sequence without bothering to check whether they're awake or not. So you can't force a person to get up. It's just not a thing you can do. So it means you're forced into the wait screen. And I'll say this, the last hour of every wait is a minimum of 10 to 12 seconds. And most of the other hours of waiting are between 3 and 5. So every time you want to wait 10 hours, you're basically dumping, 30, 40 seconds, right? And again, that doesn't seem so bad on the face of it, but when you've had to do it, 150 times over the course of the game, it starts to feel tedious. Again, that's an extra 2 hours of gameplay overall between probably just waiting for stuff, getting sent to jail occasionally. I mean, those 10-day waits are just forever. They don't speed that up at all. It's punishment. And again, it makes you sort of wonder, like, is this supposed to be a sim or is it a game? Stealth at lower levels is essentially worthless. It's hard to level skills around stealth and lockpicking because people are very, very aware of you. You can talk to and practice lockpicking with Peshek, and maybe that's what you're supposed to do to level things up to a certain extent, but stealth is hard to level even outside of that. The pickpocketing and lockpicking are both they're both pretty rough to level as well. You're going to definitely want to spend your time with Peshek, but again, at that point, you're grinding lockpicking, and it doesn't feel good. I don't think that was the intended way that they wanted. Like, again, they wanted you to level by doing things. And the guy's like, maybe you should start by, practicing pickpocketing on sleeping people. You can't. You're terrible at it, and if you try to pick a lock in the same room with somebody else, they will wake up, and they will go immediately tell a guard. Again, I tried this a couple dozen times over the course of the game, both pickpocketing and lockpicking. Every time, got busted pretty much instantaneously, even by sleeping people. Heaven forbid I try to pickpocket an awake person. The implementation of the reputation system, which I touched on this a little bit, it's a bit all over. It's a bit all over the place. To talk about this a little bit more in depth, if they love you, you don't really get anything special. You just get a bunch of people saying, God save Henry, and maybe they give you a discount. I don't really know. I didn't notice any reasonable difference in prices, even where I was at 100 reputation. If they hate you, and this is where it fell apart for me, you literally have to pay them to talk to you. I don't know if it's every single conversation, but it's at least once a day. At minimum once a day, it's at least. I'm not sure how often the reset is on it exactly. If you walk away from a guy, go have a drink at a tavern and come back, pretty sure you're going to have to pay again. Sorry about that. I'm talking a lot. It's terrible. So I had one where I was just trying to complete a quest with Godwin, the parish priest from Ujits. He was a nice guy. He had a great scene. He had one of my favorite scenes in the game was with Godwin. It really had that Mafia 2 feel to it. It was fantastic. I really, really loved it. Plus, there were boobies in it, which was a great little bonus. The town of Ujits had... I ran away from Neuhof after I was doing a mission for a prostitute, and I went back to Ujits without having been sent to jail or paying my fine or whatever, so they were still mad at me. And Ujits was mad at me, I guess, because them and Neuhof are connected for some reason. I'm not really sure why they were mad at me in Ujits. But I went to go talk to Godwin, a person who I helped out and who helped me out, and I kind of thought we were bros a little bit. Nothing. He wanted 300 gold to talk to me. And so I had a main story quest that I had to talk to him about. I had to pay 300 gold to get the main story quest done. So I was pretty pissed off about that. And then I had another side quest. So after I did the main story stuff, I was like, I'll come back. I'll see about, maybe I'll do that side quest while I'm here, since I've done these little main story quest things in the area. I'll just do this because I'm here. Fuck it. Like, why not finish this quest up? And I went to go to talk to him, and he wanted 300 gold again. So, I don't know exactly what the reset timer is on it, but it would have been 600 groschen to do 2 quests because they were mad at me. And you can go to jail and reset your sort of hatred back to 15 so that they'll talk to you and they'll be nice to you. But the problem there is you have to spend 5 to 10 days in jail, and that takes forever. A 1 day wait time is, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. I didn't really time it out. Actually, it'd be more than 30 seconds. But yeah, it's like 45, maybe close to a minute to wait for a full day, and you have to wait 10. So I think I ended up waiting 5-6 minutes for my 10-day thing. It might not be quite that long, but it was a very, very long time. It was very annoying. So not fun to do, just to get people to not force you to pay to talk to them. There's basically no music for the bulk of the game. There's some music here and there, and it's decent music. Well done by solid group of people. I think the music that was in the game is there, but it really makes, I'd say, mood setting a bit of a non-starter, especially in particularly action-filled scenes. A really great example of this, and I'm going to put it under gameplay because I think gameplay is about how you feel while you're playing a game as much as anything. Since there's no music, at one point you're charging a fort and fighting people to the sounds of unenthusiastic yelling and maybe some sort of vague drums kind of off in the distance. Whereas, another game would try to have some music swell there, because this was a scripted main story sequence where I'm running around. I'd be hearing dun 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 dun. You know what I mean? I've been feeling like a badass, stabbing motherfuckers. You know what I mean? Running around and fighting, being fucking, Henry the fucking giant forehead weirdo mongoloid guy. It would have been great. But I didn't have any of that. There was no music. It was literally just a bunch of guys off in the distance, desperately going, clang, 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 clang. It's just not, it gave me nothing. You know what I mean? I should have a fucking awesome war boner running into a camp full of dudes that I hate, stabbing them with, reckless abandon, because I'm not going to face any any punitive judgment for it. But nothing. I got nothing. And it just felt like the problem with that lack of music and with a couple of those scenes there is what it ended up feeling like, and what it was, because it's what it was I was running through an empty field towards a couple of guys and then stabbing them, and then that's it. You know what I mean? It wasn't epic, and it was made all the less epic by the fact that there wasn't even anything trying to make me feel like it was epic. No music swells, no cool, stuff. It's obviously a sort of set piece where you're storming, and this was when you're storming Vranik above Sasau. It just felt limp and impotent and sad. It could have been a cool moment, but instead it was just nothing. You know what I mean? And they can't. It's a limitation of the gameplay as well. If you ever have more than like 2 people around you, you're gonna die. You can't win a fight with 3 or more people, so it ends up limiting the situations they're even able to put you in. If you're going to be fighting against 10 dudes, they have to have 10 of your own dudes there to back you up, or you're going to lose that fight. You cannot win against that many people. It's just not a thing you can do. So again, that's one of the gameplay, it's one of the conceits to realism that ends up hurting the gameplay, because again, you end up fighting against a guy or 2, and even then they've got some backup for you just in case. And again, it's not ideal. It doesn't make me feel great, especially when I'm kind of supposed to in a scene like that. You could argue that wasn't their goal, but I think your goal when you're taking part in a battle is to feel like a bit of a badass. It's never played as this sort of, morose contemplation on war, except in sort of the moments after, where you go, oh, my parents are dead, or this thing happened, or so many people have died. Great. Your contemplations later. Yeah. But in the moment, I should at least feel the rush of adrenaline that Henry must have been feeling, right? You could argue that's a story one, I guess, but I think the music is a gameplay element. Anyway, there's On the gameplay side, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, there is nothing to do outside of the cities, which, as far as I can tell, is by design. So, what the game ends up being after you've sort of exhausted your early game exploratory spirit is just you ride your horse between towns. If there's secret content tucked away in the woods, I'd never find it because there's nothing rewarding to do in the woods unless you want to really get into herbalism, which is not herbalism. Why did I say that like a British person? If you want to really get into herbalism, great. That's a way that you can, you can get yourself some stuff to do. But by and large, you just end up with a whole bunch of nothing. You know what I mean? You just end up with a bunch of nothing to do except maybe go pick some plants, shoot some animals that you're not legally allowed to shoot, even later in the game when you find out that you're actually a noble's son, which we'll get into in the story section in a big fucking way. And I'm putting this one under gameplay, even though it was maybe the biggest storyline boner kill in the entire thing. I guess it wasn't really a storyline. It's just an effect of the way it is. You get to fire a trebuchet at Talmberg. You watch laborious loading of the trebuchet animations, which don't actually have the guy lift the rock. He literally just clips the rock through a basket, which made me kind of annoyed that they made me watch a 40-second animation of these guys, cocking and loading the trebuchet. And then they didn't even lift the rock into the fucking basket. It's like, come on. So you fire the trebuchet in what's supposed to be an obviously cool set piece where you fling a rock over at Talmberg. But what actually happens is you pull the trigger, you watch the trebuchet swing around, the rock flings out of the perfectly working siege machine of war that you've helped build through just annoying shit and saving Brian Blessed, which is, truly an honor, honestly. And then the rock despawns. Nothing flies through the air except, I don't know, the vague feeling of a rock. And then a bunch of noise is made over in Talmberg where no animations play, no particles spawn, and nothing of interest happens. Literally, the rock just goes away in the air. Now, this might have been a bug on my scene, but honestly, for a moment that we had built up to, we fought to protect it, and then they're like, you get to fire the trebuchet. I was like, I get to fire the trebuchet. That's awesome. Cool, let's fire this fucking trebuchet. And then there it goes. Rock disappears. I'm like, where'd the rock go? Well, maybe I'll at least get to see something fall over. No, you don't get to see anything fall over. Nothing happens, and the particles don't spawn. And again, maybe that was just on my computer, but it's what happened on my computer. So, great. Moving on, we're finally gonna get to the story. So now we get to run it all the way back and talk about stuff again. The opening, which has been playing in the background, and I think it was like a 50-minute video that I grabbed. Again, thanks to Beat the Game on YouTube for that Creative Commons licensed stuff. I think it's looped already now, like 15 minutes ago. That's fine. The opening is a little slow. I don't necessarily consider that to be awful on the face of it, but the opening is slow. It stays slow for a good while, and I started to find it to be a little bit grating. The slow pace, I'd say, conflicts with the open world to an extent. We're not action heroes. That's fine. It's not a big deal. But it makes you want to avoid a lot of things that are particularly exciting, right? So, and I guess the way to explain that is, since the game is paced so slowly and your skills go up so slowly, you kind of avoid throwing yourself into battle. You end up it ends up curving how you play, right? You're not particularly good at battle, so it ends up kind of forcing you into honestly your father, with big air quotes around it, even suggests to you at the beginning, oh, use your words, and so you kind of get gently nudged repeatedly towards solving things without resorting to violence or trickery or deviousness. And it's, it's a bit frustrating. I'd say one of the big problems with the opening, and I don't know if I have a note on this later, I'll try to remember not to bring it up twice, is that the opening throws a lot of things at you, and even though it's fairly long and fairly slow, you don't really get to know anybody, because basically what happens, and you've seen it here, it's a 50-minute sort of set piece of the opening of the game where you walk around the town meeting people for 2 seconds, right? You have one little conversation with each person. You sort of get super vague overviews of these characters, not so much introductions as, archetype overviews in a couple of situations. This is your girlfriend, this is your dad, this is your mom. Here's how they are in a paragraph. Here's your girlfriend. You get a little, I don't know, kind of vaguely personality to this lady. Here are your friends. They're plucky troublemakers, and maybe they're slightly more trouble than they're worth. Hardy hard, And then you get trotted around to all these little set pieces inside of Skalitz, and then you walk back up. You have a scene with the nobles to give yourself a little, here's the villain of the story and the guy that's your real dad kind of thing. Spoilers, by the way. I told you already. Tried to warn you. You get that whole deal. And then everything was fine until the Cuman nation attacked, and that's it. You know what I mean? You're everybody is dead or scattered to the wind. Your parents die, your girlfriends die, your ugly friends survive, and then you just kind of walk your way out of there with a chick that you'll have sex with eventually by scaring Cumans away from having their way with her. So you get this opening story that's supposed to sort of establish who you are, and who you are is a always smiling, stupidly moron boy who doesn't have any of the skill or intelligence of his supposed father, either one for that matter. And then everybody gets killed in sort of a trite, tired sort of way. As an opening, it didn't really endear me much to everybody, but it does the baseline job of setting up the stakes for the story. Your town gets attacked, you got to go deal with that. You come back at the end of the whole story. I think it ends up probably being a little bit more than 15 minutes all told, because you go to Talmberg and do the stuff there, and then you come back to Skalitz. It's probably about 2 hours all told. And you do that whole thing, and then they steal your dad's sword. So there we go. There's the MacGuffin. There's the core thrust of the story. But at the end of the day, I'm not emotionally attached to any of the people of Skalitz, which comes up fairly regularly through the earlier parts of the games, and it ends up kind of fading off into the background, which is for the better. But that actually is slightly to the detriment of the story as well. So I don't care about any of these people. None of this actually ends up mattering, really, other than the fact that Ujits was sacked, or Skalitz was sacked, is a sort of impetus to action, because it gets you to leave Skalitz, which is a problem I will get into how to solve in the conclusion section. But it's a problem nonetheless. While we're talking about this, I'm just going to take a quick little hop to the side and say the voice acting is all over the place. Some of the voice acting is very well done. Some of the voice acting is terrible. From literally scene to scene, you're not going to have any idea which is going to be which. You've got a lot of sound bugs as well. And then it will play random ambience in the background with no one present. So I multiple times I walked into a tavern, say, and it would start playing the tavern background ambience. The tavern was completely empty. Anyway, the game seems geared a bit heavily toward just walking your way through the main story on rails. That is to say, there is a disconnect between the open nature of the dialogue choices and the player's set motivations, right? So whatever we might decide Henry is, which the game can't really decide whether it wants us to do this or not, Henry can choose how to be in certain situations within sort of a narrow set in some instances and a wider set in others. For instance, the entire Miller subplot is about you literally being a murdering thief. Preferably not murdering, I guess, in some cases, but you can walk around and sort of kill people and steal shit from them, which runs counter to the fact that Henry's a nice Christian boy who really balks at the idea of stealing right away. but cottons to it. And honestly, again, he's still very he's very critical of the jobs as he's taking them, even if he doesn't really need the money because you've got enough in your bank. You can still force him to take the jobs. So those quests are in there, even though they run counter to his morals, right? That said, the core story quest is about you sort of working for a noble lord and finding your place and moving up in the world through that. And then finding out later that he's your father and that you are a noble-born bastard as well. And again, those run at odds to the fact that every now and again you can be a dick or you can just stab people. You can just murder people who don't cooperate with you. It's a weird way to go in a game that's kind of telling you who Henry is. It's not really giving Henry much of a personality, which ends up being a downside to the game, I think, in a lot of ways, because the core story things are fairly set and fairly driven along, regardless of what you want to do. So it ends up being to the detriment that they didn't really decide whether they wanted player freedom or whether they wanted, you to be able to do just this kind of set story and you're the character Henry moving through, and you can pick dialogue options, but they're all in line with Henry's morals. How many times have I said Harry? Holy shit. His name's Henry. I know. I don't know how many times I said Harry now. I was talking a lot. An example, which I mentioned, the miller early in the game tells you he'll buy stolen goods. I've been stealing stuff constantly already. I've been looting corpses. I come up to people who are looting corpses and I say things like, hey, are you looting corpses, you fucking creep? And then I'll try to kill them, right? And I've been stealing constantly. I've been picking up shit off anything that's not bolted down. Basically, through the early part of the game, I'm stealing it. But when Peshek says he'll buy stolen goods for you, my character goes, hey, whoa, stolen goods, not me. Like, I'd never steal goods, and I think what you do is reprehensible. And then I instantly proceed to sell him stolen goods that I got off of a corpse that I killed on the way to fucking, his house after leaving like 10 minutes ago. I'll say this, the emotional landing of the parents dying falls flat even from the beginning of the game. There's tons of time for the opening, but again, the openings, it's really, it's a longish opening, but the time spent with the characters, it's meant to ground us. It's too long, but it's underdone. You don't actually like anybody. Nobody actually establishes anything approximating a relationship with Henry. You just walk around and do perfunctory tasks so that they can pop up tutorial screens over things, and that's fine. If you want to think about this as a little tutorial area, that's okay. But yeah, it's just a little. None of it really lands. Your friends and girlfriend basically all die. There's no meaning. There's no meaningful attachment. You bounce around. I mentioned all this. I'll say this: there's frustrating railroading at times, and that comes into the whole problem of the open nature of the game and the player choice that they seem to want to give you, being at odds with how the game wants to be played. There are fights you can't win, and there are things that sort of are forced to play out. So your first fight with Runt, I missed. So you fight with Runt at the end of the scene when you go back to Skalitz to try to find the sword that your father made and get that back. When you go back, Runt fights you. So what happened in my particular fight with Runt was that I swung my sword once, missed, and my character kind of stumbled forward into Runt. He grabbed me and just shoved me back, and that was the fight over. It immediately cut to a cutscene of me on the ground with my ass kicked, which that's fairly obvious that I was forced to lose. I'm not supposed to win that fight. If he lands a hit on you, they wanted to make sure, you know what I mean? You're done. That's it. Another example from early on in the game, there's a beggar in Ratai. She's a local. She's from Skalitz. She's a refugee. So I'd like to talk some sense into her, right? I'd like to say, look, you're supposed to beg over by the church. You can't just beg in front of this guy's business. I understand you've fallen on hard times. I'm from Skalitz too, but you know what I mean. We're not going to make it better for yourself or for anybody else if you sit out here and you piss off the locals. Like, you just can't do it. We gotta, you know what I mean. We gotta wait till things get a little better. It's rough, I know, but help me out here. I'm on the town guard now, so I'm gonna try and make sure things turn around for our people. So what I can do is I yell at her or I yell at him. Uh, those are your two options. The dialogue ramps up from a calm discussion of, hey, what's going on here? Maybe we can work this out. To literally Henry yelling at this chick who's one of his neighbors from Skalitz, get out of here or I'll put you in the stocks. Like, you literally go from, get the fuck out of here, you bitch. Go stand by the church and smell bad over there, you peasant. Like, again, it's 0 to 100 with no real in the middle. You know what I mean? And for a game that says you're supposed to use your words, you're not supposed to fight. It says that explicitly. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough, man. A lot of dialogue options that feel basically like choose two choices restated in 3 or 4 ways. So you'll get this sort of list of dialogue options that you have. And a lot of them are just feel like the same thing. Like, get out of here, or you better not stay here. And then 2 other versions of the good thing, the not yelling thing, right? The pushover Henry thing. So you get a lot of dialogue where your character is going to say something different, but he's not going to say anything that different. It's still just yes or no to push you forward through things, which is fine. But in that case, just give me 2. You know what I mean? Just give me 2. I don't need 4 different restatings of the same thing. If I wanted that, I'd play Fallout 4. There's another cutscene that has Henry being insubordinate to a series of nobles, even though when given the option, I chose to play along. So at every point leading up to this argument that I end up having with the nobles, Henry ends up acting insubordinate in a cutscene. I don't have dialogue choices, but everything I'd done up to that point, I was choosing to play along with the hierarchy of the age. I understand. I'm a blacksmith's son. I'm better than your common muck-raking peasant because I have a skill that's very useful, especially to rich people. But that I'm still very much below these nobles, and so I'm not going to tell them what I'm going to do, or I'm going to say, if you could please, my lord, understand me, and and then my choice was I'm going to be a thief in the meantime. Like, I'm going to be nice to these guys so they think I'm good, but I'm going to be a secret thief. Obviously, most of that ends up falling out of the window because the game goes whatever direction it wants, and it doesn't really reward that style of play meaningfully. But again, it's one of those things. The same thing with being a thief as him back talking to these nobles. If I want to be a thief, Henry objects to that without my input. Like, he instantly objects to people being a thief, but I want to be a thief. That's what I, as the player, want to do. I don't have dialogue options. He'll just say some shit like, I'd never steal. I'm Henry, the big forehead guy. And then I would never talk back to nobles, but Henry gets himself into a cutscene and he's like, I'm going to go do it no matter what you guys think. And I'm like, chill the fuck out, Henry. That's ridiculous. Stop that. It's really, it's upsetting, like I said, because the game, it's of 2 minds about things. You get to, anytime I get to choose in my dialogue, I'm like, oh, yes, sir, right away, sir. You're a noble, sir. I wouldn't dare talk back to you, sir. And then when I'm talking to people that are of my station, maybe I'll be a little bit more sassy. You know what I mean? If I'm talking to Captain Bernard, I'm the son of a blacksmith, dude. Like, you're a town guard. Like, yeah, you're captain of the town guard, but you're not above me. You're not noble born or anything. You're just a guy. Just a guy that's captain of the town guard. You know what I mean? We're both just working for these nobles. Like, don't talk to me like I'm your fucking kid, dude, But then, like I said, you hop into a cutscene and then the linear narrative takes over. And it just undermines your player choice, which makes you feel like I don't actually care what dialogue options I choose as long as they sort of move me on. And honestly, as the game goes on, you start to see that there aren't that many. They kind of cut out some of that stuff. So in the early part of the game, you have a little bit more definition over it. And it's almost like they changed things later on. I don't know if that was an artifact of the way the game was developed or what, but I don't know. The scene with Father Godwin was really great. It's this sort of night of debauchery you go on with the parish priest of Ujits. Really well written. It gave me a lot of flashbacks to the great scenes in Mafia 2. And it really made me think of the glory days. of those the guys that worked on these games. Daniel Vavra, in particular, worked on Mafia 2, and I'm sure there were some other guys there, possibly, hopefully, working on the writing team from that. But yeah, the Father Godwin scene was fantastic. It made me wish that the game was just a linear narrative. You know what I mean? It made me wish that I just went places, did stuff, watched cutscenes. I would have loved that game. I didn't need it to be open world. Honestly, I think open world hurt the game, but we'll talk about that a bit more in the conclusion time. Hunting with Capon was pretty good. He really turns into a sort of bro. I'd say that Capon is not as genuinely enjoyable throughout the game as he could have been, given a sort of different take on him. And the fact that he treats you as his boy is, from time to time, like he swings wildly between being your friend and telling you what to do as a lord. Slightly frustrating. There are time-based missions that are not marked as such, and I found that to be absolutely disgusting. The one in particular that pissed me off was when I was going to help Fritz and Matthew in, what the fuck is that city? Liechtenstein? That's not right. Anyway, whatever that one is, Liechtenstein or whatever. They're there working with a miller, and the guy that works at the miller basically allowed some dude's kid to die and stole his ring, and I knew it, and I wanted to get the ring and prove it, but I had to go do some other. I didn't have to go do some other stuff, but it was nighttime, and I didn't want to just like sit there and wait. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna ride over to Ratai. I'm gonna do some stuff, and then I'm gonna come back. And I went to sleep, and when I woke up, the quest had been failed. It just told me that I'd failed the quest. I ran out of time. So I was really pissed off about that, and I didn't have a reasonable save that I could load before it failed, because obviously it saved that morning, which was right when it failed. And then before that, it was like an hour and a half of a game I'd have to replay. So I just chose not to do it, which frustrated me because I really wanted to. I wanted to get those dudes set up at a miller's place, and maybe, Matthew could be fucking the miller's daughter. It was great. It was a great way to help my questionably intelligent friends from Skalitz. And again, they're not even good friends. They're not even good characters in any way. They're both kind of boring, and the guy that plays Fritz is annoying to listen to, and he plays about 40 people in the fucking game. He talks like this all the time. And I fucking hate it. I hate it. I hate that voice. I'm sorry, dude. It's not your fault. Maybe it is. Maybe that's a voice you were doing. I fucking hated it. But the time-based mission thing, unforgivable to me. Again, I'm trying to play the game to enjoy it. If you're going to give me missions that have a secret timer behind the scenes, show me the timer. I don't give a fuck if it's real. You know what I mean? I might just decide to... So let's put it this way, right? I want to go and do that quest for those guys, but I don't have that much time left in my day. So what I do is I think, you know what? I got 30 minutes left that I have time to play this game because I'm an adult human being and maybe I have a job. Who knows? Who the fuck knows, Warhorse? So what I do is I ride to Rattay. I go, I sell some stuff that I sold off of some idiot wayfarers who decided to stop by the side of the road and get murdered. I don't know. It's their fault. They shouldn't have been standing there. I sell that stuff and I go, you know what? I'll hit the bathhouse. That's 5 hours gone. Hey, it's nighttime. I'll go over to Peshek's house and sleep. I sleep. I wake up the next morning. The quest has failed. Which I might not, I'll be very upset because guess what? That was the end of my time to play the game for the night. You know what I mean? I'm out of time. I got to go to sleep. I got work in the morning. I got 600 children. I have to feed all of them. One spoon at a time. You know what I mean? It just punishes me for nothing. For under the yoke of realism that nobody cares about. It's something that I feel like you could only care about if you're sitting in a conference room trying to come up with things that you think are clever. Like nobody ever thought to have quests that just time out because that would be the realistic thing to happen. That society would move on and that your friends wouldn't have a chance to get the stuff that they wanted. If I wanted it to go that way, I could just tell them I didn't want to help them. You know what I mean? It's very frustrating to have a game pull an option out from under you like that, especially given the situation, like given the fact that you can't actually know what a player what their given situation is. You know what I mean? What their playtime requirements are, or what they're going to decide to do, thinking that it's perfectly acceptable to do, without fucking things up for them. If I thought I could go back to Rattay and get myself healed up and whatever, why I should have been able to, But that's fine. I consider that a massive flaw. It happened a couple times in the game where quests I was actively interested in picking back up later, but had dropped because they weren't convenient for my immediate gameplay needs, failed underneath me. I also had several quests that just never completed. When they get the plague in Mariohead, I think is where the plague was. When they get the plague there, I wanted to fix that up, but apparently I walked around and I thought I gave the antidote to everybody. Apparently I missed somebody. So I left, and then it said failed to give the stuff to everybody, and then it started the quest objective: wait for things to clear up. They never cleared up. So Merhoyed, if there was some stuff to do there, it's just off limits now, and I can never do that quest and then talk to the guy. Speaking of, the doctor who's from the Sasau monastery went up to Merhoyed to deal with the plague. I weeded his garden while he was up there, and so after the whole thing was done, I said, hey, oh, by the way, I weeded your garden. He said, well, I'll go check for myself. So he does. He goes and checks for himself after the 2.5-day walk back, by which time weeds have grown back. And he says, you call that weeding? I'll just do it myself. Nothing I could do about that. Admittedly, my fault for not waiting till he was back there and then re-weeding his fucking garden when he got back. But, you know, hey, it's realistic that weeds regrow over a course of days, so thanks for that. Whatever. So there are a couple instances in the game where there will be different voice actors for the same characters from time to time for random lines inside or random quests. Sir Hanush, during the Vicar quest, is suddenly just a different guy, and then basically from that point on, he randomly is a different voice actor. The guy that plays Sir Hanush is either Australian or New Zealandish, and he gets traded out for a dude who I think is just actually British, or is doing a better not Australian accent. And it's weird. It's out of nowhere, and it happens a couple times. Very, sort of weird, pulls you out of the story for a second. I wrote a very angry note that I'm a blacksmith's son, and I ask the engravers what they do and why, ignoring the fact that at the beginning of the game we are waiting to get the hilt or the pommel of the sword for Sir Radzig back from the engravers in Sasau. I am a blacksmith's son who literally gets engraved metal back, but I can ask them what they do and why. They engrave shit, and they engrave shit because people want things engraved. And that's literally what the fucking guy says, basically. The romance relation system, like so many other systems in the game, is incredibly shallow. You have sex with Stephanie. She gives you a shirt, even though she's a married woman. She gives you her dad's shirt, and I had some fancy pants to go along with the shirt, which made me feel pretty good about myself. Then nothing ever comes of that. She doesn't get pregnant. Nobody ever finds out. There's literally no risk in it. You just have sex with her. No problem. You have sex with some random lady during the Father Godwin quest. The next morning, she kind of waves at you, and I was like, that chick's kind of hot. She's the alehouse maid. You cannot talk to her later. You cannot have any other interaction with her other than the sex that you had that night. And then you actually have an ongoing romance with the miller's niece. What's her fucking name? I don't remember her name now. Teresa. So you have a full-on relationship with her that culminates in sex in a barn. And then you can never pick that up. Once you're done with that quest line, once you go on a couple dates with her and have sex with her, that's it. You can bring her flowers, but that was all I managed to get done. I went back and tried to talk to her a couple other times with various other items, like a silver ring in the inventory, just to see. Nothing happened. And by the end of the game, it sort of makes sense that nothing happens because you find out that you're a nobleman's son. So, of course, you're not going to fucking marry a miller's niece. You know what I mean? That's not going to happen. Sure, you're a bastard, but you're still going to marry somebody else's bastard daughter or something. You know what I mean? So again, the romance relationship system was really a massive disappointment to me because I was like, well, I'd like to at least meet up with multiple girls and maybe I get to pick between one of them. But no, there's nothing like that. Again, it's like the reading. Um, it's like so many other little systems in the game. These little systems that you're kind of hoping are going to be more interesting, and they don't end up changing anything in a meaningful way. They're just kind of there vaguely, um, like the positive. Like if people like you, you don't really get anything out of it on a citywide level. Same thing here. I was hoping that we were going to get a chance to talk to some girls and hang out with them and pursue a relationship and maybe, maybe not a family, I guess, but at least, you know what I mean? Something deeper. I get a little house on the edge of some woods and fucking, start a life there. But obviously, like I said, linear story. So if you want to choose to do that, it's trouble. And we're sort of getting into the parts where I started to disconnect from the story as a whole because your personal stakes are fucked up, right? This is like a baseline writing issue, so we'll talk about it. From the counterfeiting on, I lost interest in the main story. The side quests are all banal enough to not really add any major surprises in. None of them are particularly fun or exciting. They're all just kind of very normal. Very normal. And from basically the counterfeiting on towards the, throughout the entire latter part of the game, the personal impetus for Henry to do anything just continually starts to fall apart. Everything becomes kind of bland and procedural, and in some cases very literally procedural, as you spend a good middle chunk of the game doing detective work, where you literally just go around talking to people and looking for clues. It begins to feel really perfunctory. You walk to a place, you fast travel to a place. If it's nighttime, you wait till morning. You click through some dialogue. You get bland, overwritten explanations of uninteresting problems, and that moves you forward through the narrative, whether you want to or not. Because right around the counterfeiting part of the quest, the story becomes this convoluted political narrative about who is doing this and what their motivations are. A thing which Henry has less than no interest in. Henry wants to get his father's sword back. So you could argue that, oh, well, you're trying to find who the sword ended up with, but that never comes up. It's literally never brought up until later when you find out you're fighting Istvan. And you're like, that's the guy that's got my father's sword. And all of a sudden he's all piss and vinegar about it again, even though he literally hasn't mentioned it for the past 25 hours of gameplay. So you really disconnect about the middle part of the story from your original motivations. And that's a problem because as a player, I don't care anymore. I have no reason to give a shit about who's counterfeiting this stuff and what that has to do with any of the larger scheme of things. It's like, oh, well, these people are paying to attack against the province. And I was like, my town got burned down. This isn't my job anymore. I want to go fuck the miller's niece and become a guy that buys stolen goods. Like, that's what I want to do now. I'd rather do that than be Henry, 1400s fucking Batman. I don't want to be that guy anymore. That's less interesting to me than developing a relationship with Teresa and learning the tools of the miller trade. I'd rather do that. You can't. You can't do that. That's not even a meaningful series of side quests. They're fetch quests that, again, banal, bland, procedural side quests. Go here, ask the person for the thing, do some mediocre, repetitive task, come back, done. In the case of the Millers, it's always steal something, try not to kill somebody, come back, I'll take the thing, over and over. The conversations become almost entirely exposition during many of the connecting quests, investigating the counterfeiters, tracking down people. I appreciate the effort that went into the monastery scene, but you're really kind of forced into the way that you're doing things. Like it's clearly this giant set piece that they build, but like so many other things in the game, you're railroaded into it. You know what I mean? You're railroaded into certain fights early on in the game. You're railroaded into the counterfeiter quest. You're railroaded into tracking down people. No amount of talking will get you around these problems in a different way. No amount of creative thinking will give you a different way to solve these quests. You are forced into it. And not only are you forced into it, you're forced into it with sort of an amount of baggage over how you feel about the things you're doing. So, um, again, let's talk about the exposition for a bit. It became a very serious problem for me that very often you'd walk up to people, you would ask them a very simple question, and then they would talk to you for 45 seconds to a full minute. They would give you a speech about their lives. You'd say, "Hey, I'm looking for a guy named Greg," and then they'd say, "Oh, Greg down from the mill. I remember him. He used to run around here as a child. Stubbed his toe real bad as a kid. Got a bit of a limp now as a result. Seems to me that if people would have just taken a little bit more time to be kind to him, he wouldn't have turned to a life of crime like he did. Guess he lives out in the woods now. Let me tell you about those woods. You know, my cousin used to have a shack out there. We'd go out sometimes every now and again. We'd take Greg along with us. Don't think that shack's still standing anymore after a tree fell on it about 6 years back." And just on and fucking on. And all I need to know is Greg in the goddamn woods? Yes? Fuck off. It's one of those things where it's great. It's flavor text, but they're not giving me flavor text in a situation that I want. They're giving me flavor text when I'm looking for a guy named Greg. If Greg wants to try to plead with me for why I shouldn't take him to jail or, start pulling off chunks of his skin or whatever it is that I feel like doing to him, none of which you can do in the game, by the way. I mean, you can take him to jail, but then that's great. But I don't need the life story of everybody in this town. I'm glad they thought him out. That's great. But there are these things that you have to be very wary of when you're developing a game, especially when you're developing a deeply story-based game, and it's called cutscene fatigue and dialogue fatigue. In this game, you got to think the player is after something. The player is on their way to do a thing. And if the more you stand in the way of the player going and doing that thing, the more quickly they're going to become tired of listening to whatever, right? As much as I might be interested in the world of Kingdom Come Deliverance and the side characters and everything else, I'm going somewhere to do something, and I want to go do that thing. I don't want to hear the backstory of 6 different people who all have a slightly different amount of information or how they know a guy. And so you end up, I think, especially towards the latter half of the game, just trying to look through the list and say, which one of these talk topics is going to just get me out of this? Which one's going to let me move on with the story? You know what I mean? And that's not good. That means something was done wrong there. And I guess you could make the argument that, that's just optional dialogue, but they put it in your way. There were a couple times where, again, even just to click through the baseline couple of dialogue options that I needed to get from one end to the other, I still had to listen to 15, 20 lines of dialogue. And it, like you said, it gets a little arduous after a certain point. You need to gate that stuff away better. I don't know. But I got seriously fatigued by it, and it's a thing. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Josh Sawyer might have been the guy that talks about this. I've seen somebody that talks about dialogue and cutscene fatigue. I think it's in that same talk about players making the right choice and wrong choice that he did at GDC. Great talk. Definitely recommend it. If I remember, I'll maybe put a link to it in the description. I probably won't. I'm a lazy guy. So where were we? Okay, the effort that went into the monastery scene. I'm sorry, I jumped back a little bit to talk a little bit more about the expository dialogue. The oncoming twist in the monastery scene was, I think, telegraphed really heavily. And honestly, so was the big reveal that Radzig's your father. We'll talk about that one a little bit later on. Right now, I want to talk about Antonius. The moment Antonius helped me, when I couldn't remember my lines at the beginning of the monastery scene, I just went, well, that's the guy. Because you're going into the monastery to find some dude who's returned to the priesthood to try to avoid getting killed for a life of crime that's gone bad for him, right? Not a bad story, but the second he helped me, I was like, well, that's the guy. That's obviously the guy. So since I've decided that, I want I know for a fact that the easiest thing I can do is ask anybody who the novice that got there right before me was. I know I've been told by a guy outside, oh, there's a lot of people coming through here lately. We've been getting a bunch of novices lately. And he says, yeah, somebody came here just yesterday. I know that's my guy. I know it's my guy because I know I have that information going in. I cannot at any point during this entire monastery sequence ask anyone who got here just before me. Like, who, you guys saw me, I came in late. Hey, it's me, Brother Gregor. Who came here right before I did? You can't ask anybody that. That question doesn't come up. I walked around and talked to maybe 6, 7 people looking for that dialogue option. I couldn't find it anywhere. You can't ask it. And that would just tell you that's Antonius. Yeah, Antonius got here right before you. Okay, well, now I know Antonius is pious, and I'll just kill him. I would say, yeah, who got here before me by name? I'd say that's a glaring oversight for any non-retarded person playing the game. It's another interest of being railroaded into a built set piece. When you go into this monastery sequence, there's an entire daily schedule that you're supposed to keep, which is supposed to make it more difficult for you to go around. Like, you've got to maintain the semblance of reality that, oh, I'm actually a monk here. I'm actually here to study in the church. You've got to go, to the refectory, whatever, and do your stuff and do your novice chores and all that kind of stuff. It just ends up being a set piece that they built for you. All that's really fun, but it runs counter to the idea of player choice or of solving the problem in a creative way. There's no creative solution to this. You're literally just supposed to talk to people, play detective, and put stuff together. And again, if that's the game they were making, that's fine. But they pretend like you have choice. They pretend like there might be multiple ways to solve a problem through conversation or just killing people. And in some cases there are, but not nearly enough of them, and especially not in the situation in the monastery. You can't kill. I'll move on from that because the monastery is just a big letdown. Like I said, the railroading is a big letdown in a game that I thought, okay, we're gonna have some freedom here. I'm gonna get to live in the 1400s however I want to, but no, Henry's kind of got set morals. I tried to also get out of it by going and talking to Radzig and saying, hey, this guy's fled into the monastery. And he goes, oh, well, I guess you're going to have to go to the monastery and kill him. That's the only option. That's all you can do to join this evil group of bandits, which is kind of an insane thing for Radzig Kobyla to say. He says, literally go lie, break into the monastery, and kill a man so that you can join a group of brigands so that you can find out where the bad guys are hiding. That seems extreme. It seems like there could be some other way to find out where they're hiding, especially when they're hiding in a well-known fort above Sasau that anybody should have seen dozens of people coming to and leaving from. Like, legitimately, how did nobody know that they're in Vranyk? The guy that recruits you into the thing even says, are you serious? We're in the giant fort on the hill. There's like 80 of us. How did you not see it? I guess you weren't looking. It's like, holy fuck, yeah. Like, okay, guys, you wrote that character's dialogue. He's trying to tell you something. This is kind of dumb. Anyway, when I went to Vranyk, I found out that you cannot kill major NPCs regardless of how much you hit them. The game tries not to let you hit them in the first place, but I figured out a system of facing away, swinging, and since the swing animations are so fucking slow and unfun, you can literally start swinging your hammer, turn around, and then hit the guy. I hit him about 30 times. He took no damage. He did not get up out of his seat or in any way acknowledge that I was even in the room while I was beating him repeatedly about the head and face with a hammer. Moving on from there, I will say this, as it's about the time that you find out that you're Radzig's kid. Someone in my chat, as I was playing this game on Twitch, said, hey, I bet that guy's your dad the whole time, or whatever. Called the noble bastard trope twist about an hour into my playing the game. I think it was during, there were some meaningful glances exchanged at some point, probably I think right after we got to Ratai or something. It was like, that guy's probably your dad. Um, so again, not well hidden. Um, Leans on a really well known trope and kind of sad. I thought it, like, literally when he said that, I said, there's no way they're going to do that. That's too obvious. I said, there's no way they would make you start you off as a blacksmith's son, and then they're oh, by the way, that noble who you've lived in front of his castle your entire life, that's actually your dad. I thought there's no fucking way they do anything that hacky. But they did. They did. And they did it with a straight face, and it's kind of sad. Kind of sad, really. I said it would be really sad if they did it when, like, I took this note at the time. Yeah, I said, that's too obvious. There's no way. At the ending, towards the end of the game, when you've got Ishtvan run into Talmberg, they take Radzik hostage. And the game sort of acts like I'm supposed to give a shit. And really, I care more about Stephanie. Like, I had sex with Stephanie. She let me fuck her. Radzik just made me live in a dirt hut with a fucking stranger blacksmith who I had to pretend was my dad for, 18, 20 years. That's not a, like, I'm not endeared to that guy. I'm supposed to care. Again, it's one of those lazy pieces of writing where they just go, he was your dad, and you're supposed to go, oh no, he was my dad. I care now. Oh, my feelings. But you don't care because they just say it. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change anything. I wasn't like, woohoo, I'm a noble bastard now. It changes nothing. I'm playing a video game. You know what I mean? It's not going to change my life. They're not going to suddenly give me a room in a castle to go live in, and I don't have to ride on a horse or do anything anymore. No, now we got to rescue Dickhead. You know what I mean? I could care about Stephanie, and this is just a pure story side of things. I could care about Stephanie, but I had sex with her, so she's a liability, and it's kind of better if she's dead. So I don't care about Radzik. Stephanie, if she ever tells Divish we fucked, I'm gonna get hanged. Maybe not now that I'm a noble bastard. Maybe that's just I got to pay some money or something. But it's not good. You know what I mean? That's going to hurt relations. So she should die. Radzik can die. I don't really care. Everybody knows I'm his kid. So, I mean, it's kind of like I'll probably be better off if he's dead because they'll treat me a little better maybe. Who knows? Maybe they just abandoned me. But yeah, so after that, you go into a sneak mission to try to rescue Radzik and Stephanie under cover of night. But again, the game gets really bad about railroading through the latter part of it because they make it seem like you're going to get to do some fun stuff. So there's this mission where you sneak into Talmberg and you're creeping around and killing dudes, and you got to do it all sneaky beaky like, or things go to shit. The problem is there is no way to change the outcome of that mission. You fail, right? Hans gets shot in the ass. And then you have to carry him out of there. Now, one of my problems with this is that part of the game is so poorly designed that they make you invincible. So Hans gets shot in the ass, and it spawns about 16 guys in the courtyard. You have to pick Hans up and run out of the courtyard with him. You're invincible. They cannot kill you, no matter how much they hit you. And then after the scene is done, you're healed. So you can say whatever you want, that's just supposed to be a fun set piece. But the first thing I did, and I guarantee the first thing a lot of people did, was try to fight. Hans is injured. Our cover's been blown, but I still want to rescue Radzik and Stephanie. So it's like, fuck it. This is where we're having the fight now. You know what I mean? That's what we're doing. This is the fight. So I tried to fight dudes. I managed to kill like 3 guys until I realized, like, I'm being beaten on and I can't die. So I kept trying to hack my way through. I did that 2 or 3 times until Hans bled to death. And then a couple times it bugged and I couldn't actually pick Hans up. One time I actually had to shoot Hans so that he would fall onto the ground. And then I picked him up and ran out. That was for the last one. But it's just, it's buggy. It's poorly designed. It's railroaded. It feels forced and it's unfun. You literally just run through 15 guys as fast as you can while they hack at you and you take damage. Like, I don't understand the point of it. It's not even a good set piece. It's an awkward set piece, if anything, and it feels weird. Again, it bugged out 3 times for me, and even if it did work the first time, the fact that it makes you invincible is very telling of the fact that they didn't actually think about how you're supposed to do this. Also, one of the problems I have here with the railroading is that you're not allowed to let Hans die. I don't know if anybody thought about that, right? But one of the times I tried after I realized that this is a set piece. I couldn't pick him up. So I said, you know what? Fuck it. Let him die. I'll just leave and then Hans can die. That'll be interesting. So I tried to do that. And you can't. You get to the ladder and you can't actually leave the castle through the ladder that you leave when you have Hans with you. It just doesn't do anything. Nothing triggers, and then you can just keep running in a circle. Nothing happens. It forces you to pick him up and carry him out of there. And again, it just felt bad. It felt like, well, okay, I don't have any choices here. I can't fight these guys. I can't leave Hans. Both of the creative choices I would have made for that scene before saving Hans, I wasn't allowed to make. And again, so if you're trying to tell a linear story, stop giving me the illusion of player choice in a couple of spaces. The game is at odds with itself. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't pick. It tries to play both sides, and it's very frustrating. You just end up in this no man's land. That's sad. Again, I liked Hans, but I thought I'm going to fight my way out of here, and I'm going to go get to Stephanie and Radzig, and we're going to solve this thing right now. Maybe this is the big hero moment. Maybe I'm allowed to do that, but no, you're not. And then I thought, well, fuck Hans. Let's leave him. Let's see what happens. Let's see how distraught Hanush is, when his ward is killed sneaking into a castle he never should have let him go into. No, you can't do that. You got to carry him out. Depressing, and not nearly what I'd expect from a game that, like I said, it seems to want you to have player choice sometimes, and then it railroads you full stop other ways, even while seeming to have options, even while seeming to have ways that you could address the situation. You can't. There's one way to address the situation. I'll say this, as we move along past that scene, it does not try to address the complexity of making your character the son of a noble. It immediately clamps off and localizes the story to around Talmberg to make sure that it's not a wider game issue. So they never have to address the fact that you are now Henry, son of Radzig of Kabbalah, right? I will say this. By the time I was done with the game, you have an option after you finish the main story to go ride around. I don't know if at that point you can tell people I'm the son of Sir Radzig Kabbalah. Maybe they did. Maybe they did some of that for the guards. But again, I assume that the guards will just ignore you either way. But it doesn't play into the wider story. The rest of the realm would treat you very differently if you're Radzig Kabbalah's son. And it becomes known. I'd say that points to a lack of ambition behind changing the world around the story, like so many other things do. It's a bit sad. But again, they keep all the nobles in one place, I think, so that during the crux of the game where you might still be doing some other stuff at the same time, before the ass end of the game, they can keep that very controlled so they don't have to worry about you doing anything crazy, like enjoying yourself. Again, cutscene and conversation fatigue. That's where my note is for that. I just got into that in my notes. It's pretty crazy. It gets pretty real through especially the latter half of the game. You're literally at no point in the game, and I found this to be slightly frustrating as I thought back on it. I spent a couple days. I finished it, I think, 2 days ago. I spent a lot of time thinking back on this. I was frustrated that for all the realism that the game tries to go for, again, it really is slavishly devoted to the idea that it's a sim. And I don't think I would have been that upset if it had sold itself as a sim and as a linear narrative story, right? It's a sim with a linear narrative. You play the life of this very specific man, Henry. He has his own morals. You are not deciding who Henry is as a person. You're literally just watching some cutscenes. I would have been fine with that. But if I'm allowed to decide even slightly who Henry is, then I think you should go full banana with that. But again, for a game that seems to eschew everything fun, like the mythology of the world, And that's one of the things I would have loved to see, but we'll get back to that in a second. You are never at any point sent with sealed papers proving your authority under the lords. And that's just rough, man. That's rough. Like, you would be sent everywhere with papers, with sealed, like with a stamped seal saying, hey, this guy's here on my authority to do something, right? It seems like that'd be a pretty common thing. But yeah, I really think that the game would have benefited from deciding whether it wanted to be open-ended or fairly linear. Even the ending is drawn out, and it's completely disconnected from personal stakes for Henry. Basically, a guy shows up and says, hey, we've got to do something about this situation with the king. And they're like, Henry, you're going to go and talk to other people. It really acts like it's just setting up a new quest. It acts like it's about to send you on another quest. But literally, at this point, you've watched the credits, and there's nothing left to do. The main story is over. It's literally just these guys having like a 15-minute long conversation about the current state of the province. Again, something Henry has no personal stake in, really. I guess he's the bastard son of a noble now, so he could do slightly more stuff. And yeah, the game at the very ass end tries to draw it back to your attention because Ishtvan gets away with your father's sword. So it kind of tries to draw it back to your father's sword a couple times. Actually, this is before the credits roll. There's an after credit sequence that we'll talk about as well. But it tries to bring the sword up a few times. But by now we don't remember that guy. We met the blacksmith father for literally all of 30, 40 minutes in the beginning of the game. And we literally just got hit with the news that we're a noble bastard now. That's happened recently in game terms. That's happened maybe a couple hours ago in gameplay terms. So what am I supposed to give a shit about? Am I supposed to care about my blacksmith father? Like, the game just has Henry tell you what you're supposed to care about, but none of it really lands with any weight. And it all ends up being kind of sad there, from beginning to end. And then you get this after credits cutscene where you sit down and talk to your dead dad, which is weird because it's the only thing in the entire game that's in any way vaguely mystical. Everything else is kind of just casually explained normally, but then after the fact, you get to have a literal talk with your dad, and your mom standing in front of generic heaven lighting for no reason. It seems grossly disconnected from a game that's done everything it can to avoid anything unrealistic the entire time. Like I said, it straddles this line between sim and, action game in a really bad way. You don't get anything fun or mythical. And I think that would have greatly improved the story if they had rolled the mythos in there a little bit. If you had found slightly more down-to-earth versions of, the sort of Eastern European mythos characters. There's a lot of great stuff in like Czech and Polish folklore, Bohemian folklore, all that sort of stuff. Baba Yagas are probably the most well-known among them, but there's this entire series of like gods and devils and sprites and evil creatures and fantastic stuff that's incredibly, it doesn't exist basically anywhere else in the same form, and it would have been a great thing to roll into this game to give you a little bit of extra stuff. So you have like this vague idea of potions, which are just concoctions that are mugwort and alcohol and whatever. But it's a little bit of fantasy, I think, would have gone a long way in this game, because they could have tied it in. They could have been like, in 1403, people believed this stuff was real, so fuck it. Let's make it a little bit real. Let's still have it mostly be about politics, but let's throw a little bit of fun in there. Let's have a little bit of, a little bit of mysticism, a little bit of whimsy. But there's no whimsy. And that's part of the problem with the whole thing. The entire thing is it's very, very grounded, and that makes it very, very dry. And since it's dry, the fact that it's so long makes it kind of hard, to go along with. It's not a big bombastic hero's tale. It's just kind of a, even the ending is taken away from you as the guy that you've been trying to kill and get your father's sword back from the whole time gets away. So that I guess they can sell you DLC. There's no ending to this game. Like, the ending, I guess, technically is that people make good on a truce. hey, we'll give you a truce, and I'm going to keep this hostage. It's the word of a nobleman. So they ride off with your dad, Sir Radzik, and then they let him go like they're supposed to. They honored their truce. Great, but like, where's my ending? I mean, that's a great ending or whatever, but where the fuck is my ending? Oh, but you're not a hero. You're just Henry. Okay, well, that sucks. That's not fun. That's not cool. Like, that's not, I don't want to do that. Like I said, I can be lame and disappointed in real life. Those are things I can do there. It's not what I play video games for. And I know that people are going to disagree on that, and that's okay. But again, I think that the same story could have been carried off in a way that would have made it better. And we'll talk about that in the conclusion. So let's move on to the conclusions. About bugs and saving in Skyrim and Witcher 3, they auto-save. They let you quick save. I talked about this a little bit before. That way the bugs don't punish you. The bugs in this game are crucially devastating. They will force you to replay hours upon hours of gameplay in some situations. The same with just the save feature in general. If you fuck up, you can lose an hour and a half of gameplay. It's rough. It's broken. And I talked about this previously. 80 employees is not a small company. I'd like to think that at some point these games should have rolled through. That some of the stuff should have been tighter. If they needed 6 months to finish the game up, they should have waited 6 months. But even then, I think that a lot of the story issues wouldn't have disappeared because the story issues aren't based on the problems with the game engine. I really love Mafia 2. It's one of my favorite games. It really is. And I wish this game had taken more clues from there, story-wise. It was an amazing game with a linear story and an open world that worked. It worked beautifully. It's one of my favorite games, 100%. And I wish that this thing had done that. Better characters, better just straight up storytelling, and just use that open world as a palette to paint on, you know. I was personally deeply super upset about the constant talk about Prague, and then we don't go to Prague. I think one of the things I started looking forward to from the beginning of the game until about the late middle part of the game, where I finally realized we weren't going, was Prague. I was like, oh, this is going to be great, because I was thinking about how The Witcher rendered a couple of larger sized cities, and they were just a joy to go around and explore. They were fantastic. And I thought Sasau was underwhelming. I didn't think Sasau was a big set piece. You get to Sasau in the mid game, and it just doesn't feel like an impressive place. It doesn't feel like an impressive technical achievement. It just feels like, you know, a town. It's nice. It's got a monastery. It's fine, but it wasn't what I was looking for. So I really wanted to go to Prague. I thought, man, if they built 1403 Prague, that's going to be amazing. I can't wait to go walk around there, see more people. I know it's going to be kind of buggy, a little bit weird, but fuck it. I'm excited. I want to go to Prague, and I want to see what they put there. Even if there's not a lot of quests there, even if we only interact in sort of a halfway kind of way, that's how it is in like Samopesh and Merhoyed. And even in Sasau, you have a couple of side branching quests in Sasau, but you don't really do a lot there. So, you know, I wasn't thinking Prague needed to be this big quest hub. I just thought, man, that'll be really, really fun. But you don't go to Prague. They do talk about you going to the biggest city by far. It's way bigger than anything around here. In the final quest at the end of the game. So even at the end of the game, they're teasing the idea that you're going to get to go to a large, fun city. Do you? No, you don't even get to see like a rendered cutscene of any of it. This is really disappointing. One of the major things I've seen people say is that you can't forgive a game. You can forgive the game because it allows modding. I disagree with that statement. There are people on the console who aren't going to be able to mod. There are people who just don't know that you can mod, that are never going to mod their games. And the game that you release should be the intended experience. And I'm judging this game based on the intended experience, and I find it to be lacking in a lot of ways. I think in a lot of ways, the game almost set me up to think that we're going for some sort of Black Isle Obsidian style quest design where there are multiple solutions to problems. And outside of a few early quests, that's almost entirely not the case. There are ways to solve stuff, but they end up being kind of bland, and you're punished a little bit too heavily for taking them. So it sort of forces this idea of a correct choice onto you. Talk your way through. That's the correct choice in this game, and it's kind of obvious in how much dialogue there is in the game that that's what they want you to do. Um, there's no real player choice beyond those dialogue checks in any way. You can kill people. Sometimes that doesn't work out. You can usually get away with it. And in a lot of cases, there are dialogue checks that basically end up being mandatory unless you just want to murder the person. The monastery writ is a perfect example of that. But how you do things is very limited, and double crossing almost never works, which, like I said, Black Isle Obsidian style games tend to allow that pretty regularly. Bethesda, too, in a more limited sense, provided the quest designers actually thought to do it. I'd say at the end of everything, the game is ambitious in a lot of ways, but it's just not fun. It doesn't really land on any of its goals in a particularly new or exciting way. It doesn't really get you anywhere that we've never been before. And I find that to be a little bit sad. It's a game that I was really looking forward to playing, and through the opening, I was kind of tilting my head a little bit, thinking to myself, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, but maybe that's okay. And then through the sort of right after we got out of Skalitz, I kind of thought, okay, maybe this is opening up. Maybe I like this. And then everything just started to wear on me over time. The game is a little too long in the tooth. It's a little bit too long for its own good. And that's just a fact of a lot of subparts not necessarily being as fun as they should be, and the concessions being made towards realism or towards authenticity as opposed to being towards the player and the player's experience. I'd hate to come down negatively on the game like I have done without offering a suggestion for what I thought would be a good solution to the game. A lot of the narrative problems, I think, could have been fixed and the story brought into better focus while keeping choice an option by just making Henry the son of a bastard noble from the jump. He lives with Radzig. They sack the town. Just about everything could go the same way, but Hans could be this sort of distant friend or confidant that we almost go through our growth adventure with, and we can sort of decide whether we like the life of debauchery that Hans lives and side with him a little bit more, or we could choose that, hey man, we're trying to get it together. Skalitz was sacked. This has brought it into sharp relief in my mind that we need to change the way that we live. So if you want to keep that choice in, I think if you just make Henry the bastard noble in the first place, you're so much better off. You're already in a place where you can have him be rude to people and say, I'm the son of a lord, and people go, I don't give a shit what you whatever. Or he can say, I want to be a man of the people. There's still meaningful player choice and character progression that's not only still there, but it's also tightened up by giving Henry more of a firm backstory. At the beginning of this, you're sold this idea that Henry wants to be a free person to go around and learn things about the world around him and explore and, live a little bit maybe outside of the structure that's been built for him. And then what you end up running into is a game that's full of structure that's built for a character that's never really properly fleshed out. So if you just gave Henry a little bit stronger of a backstory, a little bit stronger of a place in the world than he had, because with his parents dead, Henry's not a blacksmith's son anymore. He doesn't belong anywhere or to anyone. So you have a guy just floating in the world with no real personality and nothing to do. If he's a noble, he's imbued with a certain amount of necessary framing to begin with to run you through the story. And I think that genuinely the game would have benefited a lot if they'd gone that route with it. I could probably talk for a couple of hours about ways that I think that could improve specific instances, but I won't do it. Suffice it to say, I've been on conclusions for long enough. So let's wrap the whole thing up in a nice little bow. Warhorse Studios has some great talented people in there, and I think that a lot of things that they tried to do in this game were noble, if misguided, which is probably some sort of fantastic metaphor for wrapping up the story inside the game itself. I think that at the end of the day, you can't come away feeling too good about the game because it punishes you too many ways for too many things. And that's a disappointment to me. I love a good open world game. I like a setting like this. I came into this really hungry for a great game, and what I came away with was just bad taste in my mouth after bad taste in my mouth after disappointment, on and on for 30 to 40 hours of gameplay, to the point where by the end of it, I was angrily clicking through dialogue sequences that took me longer to click through than it takes me some other games to get an entire quest done. And that's skipping stuff. And that's just not a good way to put a game together. If I'm feeling that way, I guess it could just be me and not kicking back and relaxing, but I'd argue that there are base problems with the game beyond that that make it harder to enjoy unless that's exactly the thing that you want. Outside of that, there are a lot of story flaws regarding Henry as a character, and a lot of game systems that don't really work to reward the player in any meaningful way, and in fact punish the player more often than not. And the game ends up feeling tedious, arduous, painful in a lot of cases, and just not particularly fun at the end of the day. I am not really huge at throwing the out of 10 scores on the end of it, but I think people like a nice out of 10 score. Sadly, for Kingdom Come Deliverance, it's a bad one. 4 out of 10, I'd say. Maybe 3 or 4 out of 10. I don't need to firm it up any more than that, I don't think. Somewhere in that area. Keeping in mind that I gave Metal Gear Solid 5 a 5 out of 10. I think that puts it not in terrible company, but yeah, it's a game with a lot of flaws. It's a game with a lot of flaws and a lot of love put into it. But every mom loves a fucking ugly baby, dude. As long as it's theirs. And this is a real ugly fucking baby. I don't know. It needs to go back in the tank for a while. I don't know. Grow it into something pretty and then try it again. But yeah, I'd just leave this one behind. I don't want to play any DLC. I have no further interest in the game. The story failed to capture me. Henry's a blank slate and an ugly one at that. Yeah, give it a pass, guys. Not for $60. Don't pay $60 for this game. If you already have, good on you. It's already sold 1 million copies. So my opinion doesn't really matter in that direction. But those are my thoughts on the game. Yeah, guys. Anybody that actually made it all the way to the end of this, I guess I'm supposed to say YouTube shit now. So like and subscribe. And thanks for listening, guys. And yeah, that's it for this one. We'll see what the next one is. Jesus.